It's the 4th of November, 1791. Dawn breaks over the Wabash River in Ohio. 2,000 American soldiers, led by General Arthur St. Clair, are camped, exhausted, unprepared. Suddenly, 1,500 native warriors, under Chief Little Turtle, strike from the shadows. In hours, 600 Americans are dead, 300 wounded, the rest fleeing in chaos. This wasn't just a battle. It was a massacre that shook the newborn United States, forcing them to build the U.S. Army from scratch. Shocking, right? But here's the twist. This wasn't a random attack. The Native Americans weren't just fighting for survival, they were outsmarting a nation, using tactics they'd mastered from Europeans themselves. History paints these wars as one-sided, but the numbers tell a different story. 35 tribes united, forts fell, and for years the U.S. couldn't win. So, how did these conflicts start, and why did they spiral into decades of bloodshed? What drove men like Pontiac, Tecumseh, and Osceola to defy empires, and how did their resistance shape America? In the late 1700s, European settlers and Native Americans collided in a struggle that shaped U.S. history. The script lays it out clearly. Wars, betrayals, and fierce claims to the same land defined this era. These conflicts weren't just skirmishes, they were the pulse of a forming nation. Yet the moments that sparked this fire often get lost in history's pages. By the end of the 18th century, the Northwest Territory was a battleground. Once French, then British, these lands were now coveted by a young United States. Native tribes, the majority population, weren't passive onlookers. Fresh from fighting as mercenaries in the 7 Years' War from 1756 to 1763, they refused to submit to European control. The script drives this home. Both sides produced heroes and villains. Native warriors, like those led by Pontiac in 1763, stormed British forts with tactics and firearms learned from their foes. American soldiers, in turn, razed villages in brutal reprisals. This wasn't just about land, it was a clash of worlds. Settlers saw opportunity in open fields, natives saw sacred homelands. The stakes were staggering. By 1791, 35 tribes united in resistance, and battles like the Wabash River saw 600 American soldiers killed in hours. These weren't isolated fights, but a complex web of cultural and territorial tensions, where acts of courage and cruelty blurred together. This story, raw and unfiltered, reveals the messy truth of a nation's birth. By the 1760s, the Northwest Territory was a land in flux. The script lays it out clearly. These vast lands, once controlled by France, passed to Britain after the 7 Years' War, fought from 1756 to 1763. But this wasn't a thriving colonial hub. European presence was scarce, limited to a few military forts, scattered settlements, and shaky treaties with native tribes. The real force here was the Native Americans, who formed the majority of the population. They weren't just bystanders. Tribes like the Ottawa had fought as mercenaries for the British during the war, gaining combat experience and a fierce sense of autonomy. The script drives this home. The territory was native land in practice, not just on maps. While European powers squabbled over claims in distant capitals, the tribes held the ground, their lives woven into these forests and rivers. This fragile balance, with natives outnumbering and outmaneuvering thin European outposts, was a recipe for conflict. Britain might have claimed the land, but actual control was a far cry. In May 1763, Native Americans drew a line in the sand. Chief Pontiac, a cunning Ottawa leader, sparked a rebellion to push British control out of the Northwest. The script captures the fire. Coming off the 7 Years' War, Pontiac's warriors were no amateurs. By the 17th of June, 63, they had adopted European battle tactics, armed themselves with firearms, and seized 8 of 12 British forts in the region. Imagine the panic in British ranks. On the 31st of July, 1763, they crushed British troops near Fort Detroit in the Battle of Bloody Run, leaving the redcoats stunned. But not every moment was triumphant. In the 17th of June, 63, during the siege of Fort Pitt, British officers resorted to a dark tactic. They gave smallpox, infected blankets to native negotiators. The script points out this didn't wreak havoc as intended, since even Europeans barely grasped how diseases spread, but it revealed their ruthlessness. By the 17th of October, 66, the British, unable to quell the rebellion, signed a peace treaty. Native self-governance was secured, and the proclamation of 1763, banning British settlement west of the Appalachians, was upheld. Colonists fumed, seeing this ban as a betrayal of their ambitions. The script sums it up sharply. Pontiac's rebellion showed native tribes could adapt and overpower, but it also laid bare European desperation, willing to use unethical ploys when backed into a corner. This clash was more than a fight. It was a signal of bigger battles looming. When the American Revolutionary War erupted in the 17th of April, 75, Native American tribes faced a tough choice. The script makes it clear. By 1776, most tribes, including the powerful Iroquois Confederacy, threw their weight behind the British. Why? Existing treaties with Britain and deep fears of colonial land grabs drove their decision. The colonists weren't hiding their hunger for native lands, and the British seemed the safer bet. The Iroquois, in particular, made their mark. On the 3rd of July, 1778, their warriors, alongside British allies, obliterated a Pennsylvania regiment in the Wyoming Valley, Pennsylvania. The script details the aftermath. Iroquois forces didn't stop there, launching attacks on nearby settler communities, leaving devastation in their wake. But the Americans hit back hard. In August and the 17th of September, 79, General John Sullivan led a scorched earth campaign targeting Iroquois lands near Lake Ontario. His troops burned villages, torched crops, and displaced entire communities, crippling the Iroquois' ability to fight. The violence spiraled further. On the 8th of March, 1782, in Gnadenhutten, Ohio, American Minutemen massacred around 100 Christian Delaware Indians, men, women, and children, simply because they refused to aid the American army. The script pulls no punches. This was raw brutality. Native alliances with Britain were calculated, rooted in survival, but they triggered vicious American reprisals. Each act of resistance, from Wyoming Valley to Gnadenhutten, fueled a cycle of bloodshed that only deepened the divide. The war wasn't just about independence. It was a brutal clash of futures, with native tribes caught in the crossfire. After the Treaty of Paris in the 17th of September 83 handed the Northwest Territory to the United States, the region remained a battleground. The script lays out the reality. The U.S. claimed the land, but British forts stayed put, funneling weapons and ammunition to native tribes itching to resist. By 1786, 35 tribes banded together, forming the Northwest Confederacy to block American expansion. They weren't just fighting for pride. This was about survival. In 1785, the Confederacy offered to cede the Ohio Valley to avoid war, but negotiations crumbled, and by the 17th of October 85, both sides were gearing up for conflict. The first big move came in the 17th of September 86, when General George Rogers Clark led roughly 1,200 troops across the Ohio River. The script details the mess. His men, worn out from years of fighting the British, deserted in droves. Chiefs Little Turtle of the Miami and Blue Jacket of the Shawnee hit them with relentless guerrilla tactics, forcing Clark to limp back to Kentucky by October. Things got worse for the U.S. On the 4th of November, 1791, near the Wabash River in Ohio. Little Turtle's 1,500 warriors ambushed General Arthur St. Clair's 2,000 troops. The result was catastrophic. Around 600 Americans killed, 300 wounded, and only about 1,000 staggered out alive. The script calls this a wake-up call. In 1792, Congress created the Legion of the United States, the seed of the modern U.S. Army, to avoid another disaster. By 1793, General Anthony Wayne took charge, methodically securing peace with some tribes. On the 20th of August, 1794, he led the Legion to crush roughly 1,000 native warriors at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in Ohio. The final blow came on the 3rd of August, 1795, with the Treaty of Greenville. Most of Ohio went to the U.S. Native self-governance was promised, but American settlers were free to flood native lands. The script nails the takeaway. The Confederacy's unity was fierce, but the U.S.'s shift to a professional military and dogged persistence tipped the scales. This war wasn't just a loss of land. It reshaped the fight for the frontier. By 1800, American settlers were pouring into the Northwest, transforming the landscape. The script highlights the impact. Ohio became a state, and the Indiana Territory was carved out, stirring deep unrest among native tribes. Their lands were shrinking, and they weren't standing still. By 1808, Chief Tecumseh, a Shawnee leader with a vision, stepped up. He didn't just fight. He united tribes across the region, rallying them to resist U.S. expansion. The script paints him as a force, binding fractured communities into a common cause. Tensions exploded on the 7th of November, 1811, when Indiana Governor William Henry Harrison launched a preemptive strike, burning Tecumseh's village of Prophetstown to the ground. This wasn't just an attack. It was a spark that ignited a massive native uprising. When the War of 1812 broke out in the 18th of June 12, Tecumseh saw an opportunity. He allied with the British, and on the 16th of August, 1812, their combined force of roughly 700 native and British troops captured Fort Detroit, a stunning blow to the Americans. The script notes Tecumseh's character shining through. After the victory, he stepped in to protect American prisoners from native warriors seeking traditional retribution, a rare act of mercy in a brutal war. But the tide turned. On the 5th of October, 1813, Tecumseh fell at the Battle of the Thames in Canada, killed in combat. His death shattered the native alliance, leaving tribes fragmented and vulnerable. The script adds a haunting legend. Tecumseh, or perhaps his brother Tenskwatawa, supposedly cursed U.S. presidents elected in years ending in 0 to die in office, a curse some tie to Harrison's death in 1841. Tecumseh's resistance marked a peak of native unity, a moment when tribes stood as one against an encroaching nation. His death, though, was a turning point, signaling the decline of native power east of the Mississippi. The script frames it starkly. One man's vision held back an empire, but his loss opened the floodgates for American expansion. The South was a battleground long before the American Revolution. By 1774, native tribes, leaning on the 1763 proclamation that banned settlement west of the Appalachians, struck back against illegal colonial outposts. The script details how these attacks kicked off wars in Kentucky, setting a fierce tone for what was to come. When the Revolutionary War began in 1776, the Cherokee, led by the relentless dragging canoe, didn't hesitate. They allied with the British, launching guerrilla raids that terrorized American settlers. Dragging canoes' hit-and-run tactics kept the fight alive until his death in the 17th of February, 92. The script shifts to John Watts, a mixed-race Cherokee leader who picked up the torch in 1792. He kept the resistance burning, even trying to link up with the Northwest Confederacy. But the vast distance between them stifled any real coordination. By the 17th of November, 94, the Cherokee shifted gears, signing the Treaty of Tellico, which secured their self-governance and military autonomy. Still, the script notes, U.S. meddling never stopped. Fast forward to 1813, and the Creek Nation fractured into chaos. From the 18th of February 13 to the 18th of March 14, the Creek Civil War, or Red Stick War, pitted the White Creek faction against the Red Sticks. General Andrew Jackson, with 2,000 troops, crushed roughly 900 Red Street Ick warriors at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend on the 27th of March, 1814, seizing about 20 million acres of Creek land. The fallout reshaped the region. By 1814, around 5,000 defeated Red Sticks fled to Florida, joining the Seminole and swelling their ranks alongside runaway slaves. The Seminole grew into a powerhouse, but trouble followed. In the 18th of April 18, Jackson led 4,000 troops into Spanish Florida, capturing forts in the First Seminole War. Seminole guerrilla raids slowed him down, but the U.S. sealed the deal by buying Florida from Spain in the 18th of February 19 through the Adams-Onis Treaty. The Seminole kept their central Florida lands for now, but the script is clear. Southern tribes used alliances and rugged terrain to their advantage, yet U.S. military might and land grabs ultimately tipped the scales. These wars weren't just about battles. They were about a relentless push to redefine the South. By the 1820s, 5 native tribes, Cherokee, Creek, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw, had transformed their way of life. The script underscores their adaptation. They took up European agriculture, wore Western clothing, learned English, and even adopted the troubling practice of slaveholding. Known as the 5 civilized tribes, they weren't merely surviving, they were flourishing, weaving their traditions with settler customs. But this didn't secure their future. In May 1830, President Andrew Jackson, hardened by frontier conflicts, signed the Indian Removal Act, demanding these tribes be uprooted and relocated west of the Mississippi River. The script lays bare the grim reality. From 1830 to 1840, about 100,000 native people were forcibly marched from their homes. Soldiers drove them through brutal landscapes, often denying rest and looting their possessions. Disease and starvation tore through their ranks. The toll was devastating. Around 25,000 perished, a quarter of those displaced. The Cherokee called this the Trail of Tears, a name that echoes the profound suffering carved into their memory. The script makes it clear. This wasn't just a move, it was a humanitarian disaster, propelled by unchecked U.S. expansionism. These tribes had assimilated, building lives that rivaled their neighbors, but it made no difference. The relentless drive for their land overpowered everything, revealing the steep price of a nation's ambition. The Seminole weren't going quietly. In May 1832, their leaders signed the Treaty of Payne's Landing, agreeing to relocate west, but the script reveals the betrayal. They later swore they were deceived, claiming the terms were misrepresented. This sparked defiance. By the 18th of December 35, the Second Seminole War erupted, and Chief Osceola became its fierce heart. On the 28th of December, 1835, he killed U.S. agents in a bold strike and led the Dade Massacre, wiping out 107 of 110 American soldiers in a single ambush. The script captures the Seminoles' edge. Their guerrilla tactics, using Florida's swamps and forests, baffled U.S. forces. General Edmund Gaines tried in the 18th of February 36, got bogged down, and failed. General Winfield Scott's campaign in the 18th of March 36 fared no better, unable to pin down the elusive Seminole. Governor Richard Cole's attempt in the 18th of November 36 also collapsed against their hit-and-run strikes. It wasn't until General Thomas Jessup took over, using a blockade strategy to starve them out, that the tide turned. On the 21st of October, 1837, Jessup captured Osceola during a supposed truce talk. a move that reeked of treachery. Osceola died in captivity in the 18th of January 38, but the war dragged on. By the 18th of August 42, roughly 10,000 U.S. troops had forcibly relocated most Seminoles west, though a few hundred clung to South Florida's wilderness. The fight flared again in the 18th of December 55 with the Third Seminole War. After Seminole raids followed attacks on U.S. patrols, local militias moved in, targeting weakened Seminole lands. By May 1858, most were relocated, leaving only about 200 to 300 in Florida. The script sums it up. The Seminoles' resilience, mastering guerrilla warfare in unforgiving terrain, stretched their resistance for years, but the sheer might of U.S. forces, with numbers and resources the Seminole couldn't match, ultimately crushed their stand. This wasn't just a war. It was a testament to a people's refusal to vanish. In 1828, the Sauk and Meskwaki faced a bitter betrayal. The script lays it out. Their lands in Illinois were sold off, either through deception or bribes, stripping them of their home. By the brutal winter of 1831 to 1832, starvation gripped the tribes, pushing them to a breaking point. Enter Black Hawk, a Sauk leader who refused to accept defeat. In the 18th of April 32, he led 500 warriors, along with their families, to reclaim their ancestral lands. The script captures the audacity. This wasn't just a war party. It was a desperate bid to survive. On May 14, 1832, Black Hawk's forces clashed with Major Isaiah Stillman's 275 Illinois militia at Old Man's Creek in the Battle of Stillman's Run. The militia, poorly disciplined, crumbled under the attack, scattering in panic and handing Black Hawk a swift victory. But the triumph was short-lived. The U.S. regrouped, and on the 21st of July, 1832, Black Hawk's band suffered a crushing defeat at Wisconsin Heights. The final blow came on the 2nd of August, 1832, at the Bad Axe River, as Black Hawk's group, now dwindled and desperate, tried to cross the Mississippi. U.S. forces and militia unleashed a massacre, killing around 150 men, women, and children. The script doesn't shy away from the brutality. This was less a battle than an extermination. Black Hawk's uprising, born of desperation, exposed the stark vulnerability of native tribes against the growing tide of U.S. militia and settler expansion. His resistance was a fleeting spark of defiance, but the overwhelming force of a nation on the move snuffed it out, leaving a grim marker of the cost of survival. By 1858, the major native resistance east of the Mississippi River had been crushed. The script paints a sobering picture. Tribes like the Cherokee, Seminole, and Sauk were either forcibly relocated west or confined to shrinking reservations. The Trail of Tears, the Seminole Wars, and Black Hawk's doomed uprising marked the end of an era. But the story didn't stop there. As the United States pushed westward, new conflicts flared with the tribes of the Great Plains, from the Sioux to the Cheyenne, stretching through the 19th century. The script captures the broader impact. These wars left a tangled legacy. Native resilience shone through, with leaders like Pontiac, Tecumseh, and Osceola defying empires against staggering odds. Yet the cost was brutal. Cultural devastation, lost homelands, and tens of thousands of lives, with around 25,000 dying on the Trail of Tears alone. For the U.S., these victories cemented territorial dominance, paving the way for a coast-to-coast nation. The script urges a deeper look. The origins of these conflicts, often glossed over, reveal the fierce depth of native resistance and the steep price of American expansion. This wasn't just a series of battles. It was a clash of worlds, where courage and loss forged a nation's path, leaving scars that echo through history.